Hello everyone, my name's Sam Hayes. I am a research fellow from the University of Salford, and today I'm going to talk about my research project called Running About the Place. Um, as a planner by background, I'm interested specifically in urban or kind of everyday green spaces, and I wanted to explore the sorts of green spaces that I know, and to explore them in the way in which I engage with them most typically. And for me, that is through running. And it occurred to me that the way that I engage with and use local green spaces when I'm running is quite different from the way my friends do when they take their children to the park, for example. Um, and I wasn't seeing much of this nuance in the literature about how different user groups were engaging in or relating to green spaces or their different experiences. A lot of the green infrastructure literature I was reading and teaching was focused more on codifying green infrastructure by its ecosystem services or organizing it into typologies. And although the relationship between green infrastructure and health and well-being is represented in the literature, um, it's often focused on understanding the health cost savings or the propensity for physical activity based on, say, proximity to a park. And so, despite this literature, I still wasn't seeing anything that's really captured the lived experience of relating to using green infrastructure. And so I looked to literature on green exercise, and this is understood specifically as exercise taken in green spaces. And I felt this partly responded to the gap in that some of this research identifies a lack of nature connection in contemporary life and argues that we're missing out on a recuperative or restorative benefits of natural environments. And that idea is present in green infrastructure literature also. Um, Various studies kind of recognizing the value of connecting with nature through spending time in green spaces. And indeed, the ideas of the restorative effects, particularly of urban parks, is certainly not new. Friedrich Law Olmsted, the so-called father or grandfather of American landscape architecture and designer of New York's Central Park, was a strong proponent of the restorative power of parks in the 19th century. And it's also a topical, current, global idea, particularly ideas, for example, around the Japanese notion of Shinrin-yoku or forest bathing being investigated for its physiological effects, but also taking on almost fad-like status with its popularity, akin to the Danish idea of hygge. So, in framing my contribution to this gap in our understanding, I draw on Lefebvre's rhythm analysis and the idea of polyrhythmia. And I'm thinking particularly about moments of eurythmia, that's the unity of rhythm or the normal, normed state. Arrhythmia, this is moments of discordant rhythms. And isorhythmia, some sort of heightened equality of rhythms. And this is not a unique approach. It's been used to analyze marathon running and mass running events, as well as many others. But I argue that this approach gives me the opportunity and insight into the lived experience of runners with a focus on the influence of both the bodily aspect of their running practice and the spaces that they run in. And it also gives me the opportunity to draw on other theoretical perspectives to understand some of these rhythms in more detail. So I've looked to phenomenology and more than human theories, as well as affective and emotional geographies to help think about this polyrhythmia more holistically. So what I did was to conduct a series of, in the end, 14 run-along interviews with regular runners. We ran anything from 2 kilometres to 20 kilometres, all around Greater Manchester in the UK. And I also kept a running diary between May 2019 and May 2020. And to illustrate some of the ideas coming out of my analysis, I've created vignettes cobbled together from various sources. The first explores eurythmia, then the prospect of isorhythmia, and then also moments of arrhythmia. So to start then, eurythmia. Lefebvre offers a significant degree of flexibility in his explanation of how rhythms can come together and interact with each other. But he does place one important caveat, and that's to say that isorhythmia and eurythmia are mutually exclusive, and that isorhythmia is unusual, whereas eurythmias abound. And so the sort of positivity that some of my runners express cannot be simply interpreted as isorhythmia. Right? These are actual, potentially better understood as particular eurythmias of running. And the extract, and together with the film, I hope, that little clip, gives you that idea of potentially the meditative or the settled eurythmia that you might gain from running. And I hope starting to understand there might be a connection between the setting and the running. What of isorhythmia? So these more unusual moments, this is me enjoying, feeling very smug, grinning, because I've just found a new path, and I'm really happy about it. But I think Phil captures it slightly better in this extract from another running interview. And he talks about finding this landmark that he knows about from friends in his local area, and how affirming that moment is, how positive it is, and almost kind of acknowledging how weirdly positive it was to find something as simple as this bridge. So I'm not quite sure where I am with understanding how eurythmias, possible isorhythmias, feature in running practice, but I think these extracts highlight the possibility of achieving a settled running eurythmia, that is connected to your well-being, or perhaps to changing a eurythmia of thoughts whizzing around, as well as the prospect of isorhythmia that people talk, like Phil, others also talked of these moments of magic or childlike joy at seeing wildlife or a spectacular view. So definitely the prospect of eurythmia and isorhythmia, and connected to landscape and green spaces. Arrhythmia, not always as politely communicated as this sign. This is an extract from one of my run-along interviews again with Chris. We ran 6.2 kilometres this lunchtime, and it's a loop that pieces together 3 parks near to his work. And at this point, Chris and I have just emerged from one park onto a busy road. And we're faced with traffic that we've not had to deal with in the park. And so we come to a standstill. Our rhythm is literally halted. But it's not just our movement or progress which experiences this abrupt arrhythmia. As Chris notes in his comment, your senses change. They switch back on to cross the road in order to not get killed. And that is made starker by the change from the park. And specifically this tree-lined avenue, which Chris describes as a space which leads you and pulls you forward. So it's a starker change from that space to a busy road junction. But also, this instance shows not just this immediate example of a physical change in space creating an arrhythmia, but also slower rhythms that possibly also create arrhythmias. So this weekly act of Friday prayers at the nearby mosque, which is just a few hundred meters on from this junction, also creates an arrhythmia where on Fridays Chris would change his route to avoid having to navigate this gathering congregation, going up and down the curbs, etc., around the people. Perhaps heightened by COVID if he's still running this route. So we've spoken about arrhythmias, but I think we can also see it. This is the image of that junction in space, but you can also see it in my running data. that's collected from that run. I've marked the junction with that yellow circle, and you can see from those graphs they record my pace, my heart rate, and my cadence. And particularly with the pace and cadence, you see a significant dip where we are physically halted and we experience this arrhythmia. But I think I can also show it to you with this clip. This is a different junction, a different park, one of my own runs, but I hope that captures something similar. And what I think is interesting about this clip is also that it hints towards how these other sort of theoretical perspectives might be helpful in explaining this arrhythmia, the more than human and the haptic aspect of this experience. The fact that it has rained and that I don't want to get showered and drenched by this water that's now being sprayed at me by the car really highlights to you that it's not just the sort of land use change from park to road, or even the traffic and the fact that I now need new senses to stop me running into the road or endangering myself, but also that the environment is playing a role in that. And it's not always positive, that the fact this huge puddle is potentially changing and reinforcing that arrhythmia for me. So I hope, more than simply demonstrating that rhythm analysis provides us with the terminology to describe running practice, these vignettes help us to explore the way that feelings, emotions, and senses are fostered and demanded in certain spaces, and that changes in space can demand or allow switching on or off of certain senses and feelings. And the more than human aspects of our environment are at play in the polyrhythmia and have an affective or emotional quality. These are some references. Thank you very much for your attention.